Welcome back to Cubase Masterclass by Streamworks Audio. I'm your host, Walt Honeycutt, and for the next hour or so, this time we're going to be taking apart the control room functionality of Cubase step by step. And the control room is one of the coolest, most sophisticated, and also more complex aspects of what Cubase can do. And it is really something aimed at the semi-pro or pro user. So we're assuming that the audience for this video is somebody who has been working primarily on their own in a private facility, and they're now in a situation where they want to start bringing in other individuals, building their facility and capabilities out a little bit. So it's focused on transitioning into that. So we're going to look primarily at how to use, of course, the software, and then a host of other issues that suddenly arise when you take this step. So with that in mind, let's get into it and take a look at what the course is going to contain. All right, so as we make our way through the course, obviously we're going to look at this intro and overview to get our bearings first. Then in Chapter 2, we're going to cover some very important operational considerations, a few things you need to stop and think about as you embark on this next phase of your recording career. In 3, we'll go through one of my old favorites. We'll break through the vocabulary barrier. Just like every other masterclass you've watched, there's some new terms introduced, and if you understand those, the rest of it becomes much more straightforward. Not only do we have some new terms, there are some familiar Cubase terms used in different ways, which is almost worse. So we'll lay those out and get them all straightened out. Then in Chapter 4, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of going through the user interface and how the initial setup works and some of the things that are going to happen to your system as soon as you turn the control room on or enable the control room. And then the next 3 are going to drill down on the primary functions. And the first is configuring your Q mixes. Then the second is going to be setting up your talkback loops, and then finally how to configure your monitors in your listening environment. And after all of that is squared away, we're going to wrap up with tips and tricks and do's and don'ts. And this is going to unfold on 2 parallel paths. We're going to talk about, of course, the tips and tricks of using the software and so forth. But also in terms of running the business, we've got some notes in there on how to interact with clients, how to manage projects, a few other things of that nature. Again, assuming that if you're setting up the control room functionality, you're taking a step up to much more of a public-facing facility. So a few other notes about the course itself. Everything here, as with all of my presentations, will be done on an iMac, and we'll be using Cubase Pro primarily because that's the only version of Cubase that supports the control room. 2, we do need to think about your system requirements because using the control room functionality can become a resource hog, both in terms of CPU power and in terms of inputs and outputs. Like I mentioned a moment ago, you need a ton of I/O capability to make this work. You should know on the front end that using the control room is going to get rid of most of your direct monitoring capability. The demo project that you'll be seeing in the background throughout this is included with your download, and if you've interacted with any of our masterclass presentations before, you know that demo project is going to come loaded with the notepads section of each track filled up with guidance on how to do specific things, so you can follow along sort of with the home game. This presentation and any of our other on-screen illustrations that we're doing will be included as a PDF. Then, as I mentioned a moment ago, we'll also have some downloads on business considerations, some checklists, things like that you can consider. So with that in mind, let's shift gears and look at the overall concept here. And if this hasn't settled in already, the whole idea here of enabling the control room is you're going to move to a multi-space and therefore multi-role environment. And the diagram on the right here is the famous Abbey Road Studios in London. And you can see to the left, they have the control room itself, which is what we're talking about, doing a sort of a mission control where you control the recording gear, all of the signal flow and so forth. Very much the conductor of the orchestra, so to speak. And then you have these other remote spaces, in this case, a live room, a studio, and a vocal booth. Here at Combined Minds, we have most of the time just the one isolation booth in the control room, although we also have a live room with a piano in it for certain musical applications. And you'll see that Cubase Control Room allows you to go up to as many as 4 separate spaces if you need to. But let this soak in for a second that we're talking about multiple people in multiple spaces performing different multiple roles. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into some of those operational considerations in the next chapter.